promises he has claimed we can hold to be true. Next song we're going to sing is You Are Always Good.
And others had tried of cruel mocking and scourging, yea, moreover of bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn asunder, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskin and goatskin, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and in the mountains, and in the dens and caves of the earth. And these all, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise, God having provided some better thing for us, that they without us should not be made perfect.
I run to Christ and chase my fear and find a refuge.
prophecy of Daniel now turns in verse 21 through verse 35, and it focuses on a person by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes. All right, and so he ruled from 174 to 164 AD. And he is a precursor, he is a foreshadow, he is a type in the Old Testament of the coming of the Antichrist. How many of you heard the Antichrist before? You've heard of that, okay? And so this individual is foreshadows and is a type of Antichrist that's found in the Old Testament. And so I just want you to be aware of that as we get into this. The whole Daniel chapter 11, the entire chapter is filtered down and coming to two individuals. And the first individual is Antiochus Epiphanes, and the next individual, which is found in verse 36 through the rest of the chapter, is none other than the Antichrist himself. So he's the second in the Trinity, the unholy Trinity. Satan and the Antichrist and the false prophet. All right, so I just want to give you that as background. I just want to run over some things that we've already seen. So as we go through here real quickly, you've seen Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 are two different dreams about the same thing. Okay, let me say it again. Two different dreams coming from different ways of the same events that are going to happen and occur in life. Daniel chapter 2, we saw the head, the chest and arms, the belly and thighs, and the legs and feet. And each one of these represents a kingdom. Okay? And this can be verified historically. Okay, so this isn't like, well, let's flip a coin. Yeah, that Babylon, let's put that one there, first one. No, the Babylonian Empire was first. Then you have the Medo-Persian Empire. You have the Greeks. You have the Greek Empire. And then you have the Roman Empire. Today, where we're at, we're going to be talking about this area right here in the Greeks. Okay? And Rome will be mentioned. But that's where we're at when you get to 11 and you get to verse 21 through verse 35. Okay? So just so that you understand, that's where you're at on that. You say, well, what in the world is this? What's this this picture here you got? Well, that is the head, the chest and arms, belly and thighs, and the legs. That is the dream of Daniel chapter 2. And as you remember, at the end of Daniel chapter 2, there will be a stone that will come and will destroy all of this. Every bit of it. And that stone is none other than cut out not by human hands. That stone is Jesus Christ. He's the Son of Man. He's the everlasting kingdom of God. He will set up his everlasting kingdom after the 7 years of tribulation found here on the earth. I know what I just said, kind of just, man, I went from here all the way to here. Okay, the 7-year tribulation has not occurred yet. That will occur. So if you're post, if you're mid, whatever you are, as far as your millennialism, and whatever you are, we are pre-trib. We are, and I believe that the rapture will occur, and I believe there will be 7 years of pure hell here on earth. And so that's according to God's word, and that's according to what we've learned in the book of Revelation and in the book of Daniel. You say, are you trying to scare people? No, not at all. I'm just trying to tell people the truth, because the truth will set you free. And the truth is, Jesus Christ loves you so much, and he loves me so much, that he's given his Bible out that you can pick it up and you can read it from cover to cover, and you can know exactly what's going to occur. So he's not coming up on behind you and trying to hide around. He is coming straight forward, and he's saying, this is what's going to happen. And so we have a decision that we have to make. It's interesting, that decision that you have to make, it's the most important decision you will ever make. And that's the decision whether to receive or reject Jesus Christ. You say, oh no, I'd never reject him, I just won't receive him. There's no such thing. There's no such thing. You can't sit on the fence, right? Because that hurts. So you can't do that. You either are for him or you are not. And this is the great thing. When you're for him and you receive him, he comes into your heart, he changes your life, and you can never be on the other side of the fence. That's absolutely wonderful. That's good news. That's really good news. However, if you stay on the wrong side of the fence and you reject him and you say, I don't want him now, I'll just wait because I know all these facts you're saying, and I understand that factually, and boy, as soon as you all leave, then I'll know, okay, it's happened, I believe now. According to 2 Thessalonians, you will not believe. You say no. Let me tell you this. If all of this that has been given hundreds of years before it even happened is true, do you think that God knows whether you will receive him or reject him or not? I think it's pretty fair to say that he knows what he's doing and he knows everything. That's why he's omniscient. That's why he's omnipresent. He's already where you're trying to go. He's already there. And the great thing about it is he loves you, he loves me, he loves you right where you're at. And he gives you and me the opportunity to receive him, change our life, and go to the next level that he wants us to go to in our spiritual walk with him. But it is all based upon you saying, you know what, I agree with you, I'm wrong, you're right, I want to receive you as my Savior, I ask you to forgive me my sins and come into my heart and save me, and I know based upon your word, you do not lie, you cannot lie, that's your very nature, and I'm asking you to save my soul. And let me tell you, he will. He will. You say, well, that's way too easy. No, that's your thinking. See, God's plan is perfect. His way is absolutely perfect. You say, that's way too easy. Well, it's not your plan. See, because what we do a good job of messing up things that God says to do, don't we? Oh, I know you wouldn't, but I do. I just jump in there and I just mess it all up. He says this is what you have to do, and if you do it, then this is what's going to happen. Okay? So just want to let you know as we go through, because some of you are new here and you say, boy, I just got in here and man, they're in this. What's going on? This is what's been going on before you got here. This will be going on probably for a couple of more weeks, and then we will be done with the book of Daniel. And we'll move on. I don't know. Don't ask me. I don't know yet. I get that question every week. Where are we going? Where are we going? If you know, tell me. All right? So Lord doesn't know. I don't know that yet. But I wanted to let you know this. Okay, go to the next slide. There's going to be some slides on here. You're going to say, whoa, wait a minute. This is on the sheet that I gave you. This is one side of the sheet. This is Daniel chapter 11. This is verse 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 3, and 4. These are the characters involved in these verses. Because you have a lot of pronouns and you've got to stick names into there and you're like, who are these people? Now you flip this to the next side of your sheet and you have verse 4, 5, 6, 7 to 9, 10 to 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 to 19, 20, and this is where we find ourselves today. Verses 21 through 35, and it's talking about Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Antiochus IV. He's the rise of the little horn who will war on the southern kingdom, but he turned back by the rise of the Roman Empire and will turn on Israel. He was a nuisance to those in Israel. He hated the Jewish people. He literally hated them. And more than once, he would go in and he would cause a Holocaust. And we'll see that today. But as we go through here and as you read Daniel 11, you got to understand there is more history involved, background history involved in Daniel chapter 11 than any other chapter in the entire Bible. So that's why I've taken my time to go through this so that you'd understand these are the characters, these are the players, and this is what's going on, and this is what God said. And what's amazing is he's accurate in what he says. And he said it hundreds of years before it even occurred. And so I want you to understand that you can believe the Bible. Yes, that's the book for me. I stand alone on the Word of God, the Bible Bible. That's what they're doing back there right now. So I just want you to know that you can believe the Bible because it's true and it's sure. As you go to the next slide here, this is another sheet that I gave you. I don't have it out there right now, but this is another sheet. This is where we are today. We're right down here. Antiochus Epiphanes, he's the north, the Seleucids, the Syria, he's the king of Syria, and then you have Ptolemy IV, which is Philometor, Ptolemy Philometor, he's here, he's the one in the south, he's the one in Egypt from the Ptolemies, okay, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, okay. So some of you may want to know what, I've heard those words, but I don't know what they're about. This is what they're about. This occurs from Malachi in your book, in your Bible, from Malachi to the book of Matthew. There's how many years? 400 years of what they call silent years. That's a misnomer, because there was a whole lot of noise going on in 400 years. And as we've seen here, there's a whole lot of battles, there's a whole lot of things that are going on. And so he has stopped that in Malachi. You get to Matthew, and he picks up exactly where Jesus Christ is born into the world, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So I just want to let you know that as far as historically. So all of these things that you see in this chapter can be, historically, it can be shown exactly who these players are. We get to next week, verse 36. That hasn't happened yet. 37, 38, 39, 40 hasn't happened yet. Will it happen? Yes, it will. And it'll happen exactly like he says it'll happen. So I just want to let you know that. Be confident and be comfortable knowing that, hey, what God says, you can believe. You can believe him. You really can. Some people have, they say, well, I believe the Lord and I trust him for my salvation, but man, I just don't know if I believe this stuff. It's all inclusive. It's all inclusive. When you believe him and you trust him, you believe his word, because his word is perfect and it will not lead you astray. All right? So I just want to let you understand that and know that. In place of the king of the north, a despicable, terrible person would arise. All right? The honor of being king would not be rightly conferred upon, and he would come on the scene in a time of prosperity, in a time of security, a time of peace, and unexpectedly would seize the kingdom when they were off guard through flattery, through deceit, and through fine promises. This is the method of action and the method of operation that Antiochus Epiphanes did very, very well at. He was really good at doing this. He'd come up to you, give you a big hug, and say, hey, let's be buddies. And you'd turn around and think everything's okay, and he's doing everything behind your back to overcome and take what you've got. That's deceptive. He is the type of Antichrist that will come. The Antichrist will be deceptive. We got a pretty packed house this morning. You can sit down here in front of John if you wanted to on this row. But we got a pretty packed house this morning. I guarantee you if the Antichrist came in, everybody would stand up and go, man, who's that? That's a nice guy. Really? Come sit with me. Sit right by me. He'd look good. He'd sound good. And everything would be just fine. But he's the deceiver. He's the king of deception. And that's what he does really. He's an expert at that. And so I just want you to understand, this is the foreshadowing of that Antichrist. His name is Antiochus Epiphanes. Number one, as you take notes, Antiochus's contemptibility. If you want to take notes, you can put AE. I didn't do that. You can put AE, Antiochus Epiphanes, contemptibility. All right? So I make it easy for you. AE, contemptibility. Verses 21 and 22. So let's read. First of all, we note his coming to power. Antiochus Epiphanes coming to power in verse 21. It says this, it says, and in his state shall stand up a vile person, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. You think some people are slick willies when they're politicians? You haven't seen the master yet. He's going to be the master of the Antichrist, and Antiochus Epiphanes was. The last we saw of this Antiochus, you remember he was a hostage in Rome. The last that we heard and talked about him, and last week, he was still there when his brother Seleucus took the Syrian throne after the death of Antiochus the Great. All right, Seleucus decided that he needed the younger Antiochus in Syria, probably thinking that he could use Antiochus's contacts at Rome to secure better, a better a way for him to do what he does best, and that is to trick people in believing that he's on their side and they're on his side. Seleucus decided that he needed the younger Antiochus in Syria, and so he arranged to send his own son, Demetrius, to Rome in exchange for Antiochus. And while Antiochus was on his way home from Rome, he stopped at Athens, where he where he heard that his brother had been murdered, and that Heliodorus, the tax collector, had proclaimed himself king. We saw this in verse 20, that there would rise up somebody who would be a raiser of taxes. And this is exactly what happened historically. That claim was immediately contested by who? Ptolemy Philometor. Say, okay, who in the world is that? Remember, Ptolemy Philometor is the king of Egypt. You remember this. Remember, I'll try to help you do this. Ptolemy, whenever you see Ptolemy, many of these names begin with Ptolemy. Philometor, Ptolemy means Pharaoh. Okay, you can hook it to Pharaoh, and you say Pharaoh's in Egypt. We all know that, okay? So Pharaoh's in Egypt. Seleucids are in Syria. Seleucids was Syria, that's in the north. And Ptolemy is with the pharaohs, which are in Egypt in the south. You say north and south, how do you get that? Always in prophecy, the center of everything in prophecy is where? Israel, Jerusalem specifically. So if you're north of Jerusalem, you're on the north. If you're south of Jerusalem, you're in the south. So geographically, you can figure that out in prophecy, all right? So this happens, Ptolemy Philometor, the new king of Egypt, who claimed the Syrian throne on ground that his mother, Cleopatra, again, this is 100 years before the Cleopatra that you're thinking of in Rome. This is not the same Cleopatra, okay? This is Cleopatra's great-great-grandmother. Okay, so that helps you, because I know when you say Cleopatra, immediately your mind goes, who was the lady that played that? Elizabeth Taylor, thank you. This isn't the Cologne Cleopatra, not at all, okay? This is way before her, 100 years before her. She's coming in the story, but it'll be later on, all right? So you understand that. That claim was immediately contested, and the new king of Egypt would claim the Syrian throne. And so Antiochus dismissed the claims of both Heliodorus, the usurper, and his nephew Ptolemy. If anyone had a right to the throne, Antiochus Epiphanes said, I do. He said, I've got a right to it. He was determined to get it. And various ancient historians agree that young Antiochus was indeed vile. He was contemptible. He was a case to be tied. I mean, he was something else. There was nothing that he would not try. He would do anything, and he would flat out look at you, and he would lie straight to your face and wouldn't have a problem with it at all. And if he could do a deal with you, you better believe it would be done. And you would think it's the best thing since sliced bread. And then you get looking at it and it had mold all over it. Because why? He's going to twist it, he's going to turn it, he's going to use it against you. Because why? He wants what you have. I just want to make sure you understand this. Do you understand the Antichrist? He hates God. And he knows what you have as a Christian. And therefore he hates you and me. If you don't see that, you're totally blinded. And so you need to understand that Satan hates you and he hates me. But he'll always come around with something that looks good, and he'll tempt you with it and say, hey, this is for you. And by the way, you deserve it. And immediately your mind ought to say, according to God's words, Jeremiah 17:9 says, my heart is desperately wicked, who could know it? I don't deserve a thing. I deserve to go to a place that was made for the devil and his angels. That's what I deserve. But because God's grace, God's riches at Christ's expense came, and he gave me faith, forsaking all I trust him, because of that, I have a way out. And he does not like that, because we don't go his way. He wants to be, Isaiah chapter 14, 12 through 14, he wants to be the one that you worship. And so we have to understand that Antiochus Epiphanes, he thought the same way. Thought the same way. He says, I want them to worship me. And so you'll see this time and time again of the way that he operates, and he uses those flatteries, and he peaceably comes in and he turns everybody on top of their head. And he loves to do this. Next, we see his control of the priesthood. His control of the priesthood. Look at verse 22. And with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant. Many believe the overflowing forces that's mentioned here, which sweep away all opposition, refers to the overthrow of the Egyptian army near Pelusium. Pelusium was in Egypt, and Pelusium is a key place that they had many battles. Soon after Antiochus seized the throne, his nephew, this is how distorted this becomes. His nephew is actually Ptolemy Philometor. Do you see that? Ptolemy Philometor, who is the ruler of Egypt, is his nephew. Ptolemy Philometor's uncle is none other than Antiochus Epiphanes. How did that happen? Don't you remember? This has happened twice between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. What do? If I'm the loser, what do? I take my daughter and I say, hey, you go marry the king. It's exactly what happened in this. And so you have these connections between these families. So Antiochus seized the throne. His nephew Ptolemy Philometor made an ineffective attempt to recover the territory previously lost to Syria. The campaign was a disaster. His forces were swept away as by a flood, as the text literally states. But who was the prince of the covenant? The prince of the covenant always refers to Israel. The prince of the covenant was possibly Onias III. He was the Jewish high priest at that time. One of the first acts of Antiochus Epiphanes was to depose him, both because he opposed the pro-Syrian Hellenized party in Jerusalem. And when you talk about Hellenized, it means the Greek way of things. They had different religious purposes, and they worshiped pagan gods, such as Zeus, such as they're in Olympus. They would do these worships to these pagan gods. And so he got sick and tired of the Jews doing their worship to this guy called Jehovah God. And he didn't like that at all. So he wanted to change everything. So exactly what he was after and what he was trying to do. Because he was a supporter of Ptolemy. This Onias was. He was murdered. So Antiochus Epiphanes killed him. His brother Jason, who paid a substantial bribe to obtain the office of high priest, always something going on behind the background, was a complete Hellenist. He was completely into Greek philosophy. He was into Greek life. And he said, hey, this is exactly what we need to do. He seduced a considerable number of Jews, some of whom called themselves Antiochians. Antiochians is what they were called. Because why? They deified Antiochus Epiphanes. All right? So let's move on. Number 2, Antiochus's craftiness. His craftiness. He was contemptible, but look at his craftiness. In verse 23 and 24, we read this: after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. He shall enter peaceably, even upon the fattest places of the province, and he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey and spoil and riches, yea, and he shall forecast in his devices against the strongholds, even for a time. Put your Bible, put a pen or a pencil, and underline that, even for a time. That's very important. It's very important you understand who's in control. It's not Antiochus Epiphanes. God is always in control of all nations at all time. And we sit and we think, what in the world's going on in this world, and why isn't he's in control of who gets to be president, who gets to be dictator, who gets to become queen, who gets what? God's never out of control. It's our response of what's going on. And so you may think, hey, we haven't had a good president since Washington. And I would agree with you. We haven't. Since Lincoln, we haven't. Some people, we haven't had a good president. You know why? Because we haven't been a religious right righteous people. You get consequences to your actions. Do you think that we're going to get away with murdering how many babies? Do you think we're going to get away with our culture turning and saying, hey, it's okay to change who you literally are from a man to a woman, a woman to a man? You don't get away with that. And so there's consequences to each one of our choices. And as you listen to me talk about this, which I don't do a whole lot, the history and everything behind all these scriptures, you have to understand every person has the choice to do right or to do wrong. You say, I can't. You can't on your own. But when you receive Christ as your Savior for the first time, you can say no to sin. That's good news. And if you're here today and you've never received Christ your Savior, you need to understand you can't win on your own. I'm just telling you the truth. That's what God's Word says. That's why He gave us the 10 Commandments. So that you would know this is the holy standard that we're looking at, and you failed in every one of them. James says if you fall in one, James 2:10 says if you fall in one, you've done them all. And we saw that in our study not too far long ago when we looked at the 10 Commandments. You've went against every one of them multiple times. Multiple times. And so there's always consequences to the choices we make. So here, Antiochus' craftiness. Antiochus Epiphanes was crafty in all of his dealings. In view of expected war with Rome, he signed a treaty with two guys, Epiphanes and Attalus, who had helped him to his throne. But Antiochus had no reluctance about breaking the treaty to secure the more powerful patronage of Rome in return for a promise to serve Rome's interest. Oh, why? Because he was wanting to become a Roman? Absolutely not. He wanted his enemies close to him. So he says, hey, let me do some dealings with the Romans, and guess what? I'll learn more about them, and then I'll turn against them and take them over. And you see this over and over again. He did become strong with a small people. You see, when he reappeared in Syria after being a hostage in Rome, he was almost a nobody, but soon he reigned in strength over a great people. History tells how rich he was and how great was his military power. The craftiness of Antiochus, he had designs on Egypt, but he signed a peace treaty with the youthful Egyptian king to lull Ptolemy into a false sense of security. Antiochus then proceeded with his goal. Still mounting assurances of goodwill, he made his way up the Nile as far as Memphis. His army was small, but it enabled him to build up his strength. He entered peaceably even upon the fattest places of the province. It's exactly what the Word of God says. Still assuring the trusting Ptolemy of his friendship, Antiochus suddenly invaded Galilee and Lower Egypt and achieved something that none of his predecessors achieved. He got farther than any of them ever dreamed about coming. You see, this is in Galilee where he's coming down, and he makes it here to Memphis, and he's almost here to Alexandria. He's got all of this area. None of his predecessors from Syria had ever went that far at all, not even close. And so he's literally, watch the word, snaked his way in. And he's got a long ways to go. Well, how did he do that? Well, he was slick in what he did. He distributed his booty lavishly, hoping to what? To make friends and influence people. So when he took you over, he took all of your goods and he just handed it out to everybody that was on his side. You say, well, that doesn't make sense. Why didn't he take his own? He could care less. He had whatever he wanted. Because why? He's a dictator in mind. Dictators come in and they go, hey, you've got something? Guess what? It's mine. I'm taking everything over. And then what did he do? He just shared it with everybody. You share it with somebody, and what's attached to that? Strings are attached to it. If you're not careful, strings get around your neck, and when you try to walk away from the string, it what? It hangs you. It hangs you. And so he had everybody owing him. Look what I gave you. Look what I've done for you. You know things don't change, do they? Because many of you in your mind, you're going, I know a situation like this, I know a situation like this, I know a situation like this. This is really the same. You're exactly right, bless you. You know why it's the same? Because it works. He doesn't have to change his game plan because why? Because we're stupid. We really are. That's what God says. Wise up. Pay attention to what's going on. What do you see going on? Pay attention. You don't need to do that. You don't need those things. So, the young Ptolemy thought all of this can well be imagined. For the moment, however, he was mesmerized as a bird is mesmerized by a snake about to devour it. So he's thinking, okay, things are doing okay, and they're not at all. The secret plans of Antiochus called for the taking of all the major Egyptian fortress cities, especially Pelusium, Naucratis, Alexandria, and Memphis. So as the text says, he forecast his devices, devised plots against the strongholds, even for a time. I told you to underline that even for a time. This is why. That final expression shows that God had already drawn the line beyond which this treacherous man would not be allowed to go. For instance, although he did eventually capture 3 of those fortresses, he never got to capture Alexandria. He never got to capture that. God drew a line, and he said, that's enough. So we come up to number 3, Antiochus' conquest. His conquest. First of all, we're told he entered the Egyptian kingdom. We just talked about that. When his initial preparations were complete, Antiochus mobilized a large army and marched against Ptolemy. But by then, the Egyptian king was aware not only of the danger, but also of the character of his uncle. He knew what his uncle was about. He hastily mobilized an army to match in size that of his enemy. The first encounter was at a place between Pelusium, the great frontier fortress, and Mount Cassius. Ptolemy was defeated. So he was beaten by Antiochus Epiphanes, that one. Another battle followed. Antiochus was victorious again. This time he captured Pelusium, marched on to Memphis, and made himself master of most of Egypt, except where? The city of Alexandria. He didn't make it there. Because why? God said, I'm going to cut it off there. You have to understand, God said this 300 years before it happened. That's something else. And he knew exactly what was going to happen, and he's telling us the truth. Many of Ptolemy's woes resulted from the treachery of some of his own trusted advisors. The text says, forecast devices against him. What were those devices? Ptolemy, your uncle has made inroads to all your guardians. And he has paid them that they would go against you. See, Antiochus Epiphanes, and by the way, the Antichrist, knows if he can make havoc in your home, he's got you. So he's going to do his best to create havoc in your home, havoc in your cabinet, havoc in where you're basing your operations from. He's the king of deception. He knows that. And he did a very good job of doing this against his nephew. Antiochus was a master of intrigue, and much of his success stemmed from his ability. To do this, he subverted Ptolemy's guardians and many other of the Egyptian king's courtiers and captains. And the unhappy Ptolemy discovered too late that these men had been dealing treacherously with him throughout the course of the war, and that at the last they had openly betrayed him. So what happens? Next thing we see, not only he entered the Egyptian kingdom, but he entertained the Egyptian king. He wasn't going to stop there. This is Epiphanes. He's not stopping. How much is enough? $1 more. Ever met anybody like that? Oh, they're all over the place. How much is enough? Just one more. Just one more. Just one more. So it seems that for some time, the Egyptians had been growing tired of their ineffective and gullible king. And so what happens? Many of them had transferred their allegiance to Ptolemy Philometor's brother, Physcon. 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 Whose successful repulse of Antiochus at Alexandria had greatly increased this prestige. You see, when he tried to go against Alexandria, this guy, Peter's, his brother, took over and said, hey, I'm going to defend this place, and we're not going to let this happen. And so he did that. So what happens is, this rivalry between the two brothers gave Antiochus his pretext for his continuing interference in Egyptian affairs. So if he can get two brothers against each other, he's got it made now. So that's exactly what he tried to do. But they knew what Uncle was up to. So what they do, they came together, like brothers ought to come together, and they said, we're not going to do this. We're not going to allow him to do this. So unable to take Alexandria, Antiochus returned himself to Memphis and sat down at the conference table with his youthful nephew, Philometor. This is interesting. What's it say in the text? So you've got Epiphanes right here and Philometor right here. They're going to sit down at a table and they're going to put together a peace treaty. Let me ask you, have you ever in your life saw two people come on television, sign an agreement, and stick with it? Because if you have, come and tell me about it, because it's never happened in history. It's a factual thing. It's never happened in history that two have come together, wrote a peace treaty, and everything is fine. Everybody does their T's and their I's, and we'll keep this. Nope. Well, by the way, whenever you see the Middle East coming together, sitting across the room from the table from each other, and we have a president that says, look at this. They're shaking hands. They're going, as soon as they get behind and off the camera, they would annihilate each other and wouldn't think a thing about it. They're only doing this because someone asked them to do that, and they're going to go right back and do what they planned on doing. Why? Because man's heart is deceitfully wicked. Who can know it? Yikes. And that's the truth. And so this is what happens. He sits down with him, and he what? And both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed. We just said back here, right before that, we said that there's, even for a time, verse 24, you see that? Now he says this, he said, for yet the end shall be at a time appointed. As you see this over and over again, God's telling you, I'm in control of what's going on. I don't care what they're doing. I'm in control of what's going on, and you can believe me. And we need to trust him because he knows exactly what's going on. So he entertains the Egyptian king. Verse 27 says, and both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed. God says, I'm still in control of what's going on. All right? And so as soon as Antiochus was gone, Philometor made overtures to Physcon, his brother, and proposed a form of joint sovereignty. His brother received him into Alexandria, and then the two issued a proclamation against Antiochus Epiphanes. That's historical, so you understand what's going on behind this. As the text declares, the end of these wars was not yet. Man proposes, God disposes. Always. Furthermore, the land of Judea had not yet learned its lesson. You see, there's other characters involved. What's God doing? He's chastising his own kids. And he's saying, you have walked against me, and you've done sin against me. I've taken all of your people, most of your people out, but guess what? You still aren't obeying. Sometimes we say, hey, no, I need revival in my life. You don't need it just for a couple of days. We need it for a lifetime. And they thought, hey, seems like we're doing good. Nobody's come and clashed against us for a little while. And so what's he do? He sends Antiochus Epiphanes back up there to do what he's called him to do and allowed him to do. See, this is interesting. Antiochus, number 4, Antiochus is cruelty. Antiochus is cruelty. Look at verse 28. Then shall he return, Antiochus Epiphanes return into his land. His land is the Syrian land. It's to the north. With great riches. And his heart shall be against the holy covenant. Who's always the holy covenant? It's always Israel. It's always Jerusalem. It's always that area, okay? So he's going to turn against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land. So he's going back there, and he's going to do exploits. That's not good. Okay? The prophecy says he shall act effectively. He will accomplish his pleasure. Antiochus was not yet finished. He horrified most of the Jews by sacrificing what? Sacrificing a sow on the brazen altar in the temple court, and not content with that insult to the holiness and majesty of the living God, he made broth of swine flesh and sprinkled it all over the temple. Not a smart thing to do. No wonder Antiochus Epiphanes is regarded as one of history's major types of the coming Antichrist. But the Holy Spirit was not yet finished with his prophecy, because Antiochus was by no means done. He was laden down with booty. He returned to Syria, still smarting over the fact that the Jews hated him and had rejoiced to think him dead. Now he had given them just cause to hate him even more. And so finally we see Antiochus' crimes. His crimes. What did he do? Well, first of all, you begin with his rebuff. Look at verse 29. His rebuff. Verse 29 says, at the time appointed, there it is again. You keep seeing that over and over again in this chapter. At the time appointed, by who? By God. He shall return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. For the ships of Kittim or Chittim shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. Well, what's going on? In Egypt, the reconciled pharaohs agreed to a joint regency, and they made common cause against their mutual foe and prepared for a fresh onslaught. Antiochus thereupon undertook a second campaign against Egypt, and a campaign ignored in the prophetic text. Because why? Because it didn't have much to do with Israel. But his third campaign had dire consequences for not only Syria, but also Judea. After Antiochus' second campaign, the pharaohs decided that they had suffered enough from the opposition, and because they needed a strong ally, they hired Greek mercenaries to stiffen their own armed forces and send an embassy to Rome to appeal for help. What did God say was going to be the next kingdom to take over after Greek? Rome. Here it comes. By the spring of 168 BC, Antiochus was ready. He ordered his army to march, demanding the immediate surrender of Cyprus, Pelusium, and other territories. No one could stand before him. Memphis fell, and Antiochus appeared before the city of Alexandria. But as the text says, this time it was not by the way that he had done before. The ships of Chittim lay at anchor in the bay. These ships were the Romans. The Romans had come down to help them because why? They were a fledgling group that was getting ready to have a huge empire. And this is in their young days at that time. And so what happens? I'd like to have been there for this one. It was interesting. Diplomats from the Roman Senate met Antiochus 4 miles from Alexandria. He was almost there. I'm going to try to say his name. Pope Elias Laenas, Laenas, Papalius Laenas, handed him an ultimatum ordering him to leave alone the friends of the Roman people and to evacuate Egypt immediately. Antiochus, trying his old game of deception, replied that he would consult with his advisors as to what should be done. And I love this. The Roman was not to be deceived by bluff. He took his staff and drew a circle in the sand around the Syrian king. And he said this, before you step out of that circle, you give me your answer in conformance with the Senate's demands. Intimidated, this international bully replied, Antiochus, if it is so pleased the Senate, we must depart. And so Antiochus Epiphanes put his tail between his legs and he went the other way. Because why? Because just as God said, Rome's going to show up. And they did. And they said, get out of here. You don't want to mess with us. And so I would have loved to seen him put that little circle around him. And here he is. I mean, you think about that little circle, it reminds me of when you're on stage and it's all black and they put this circle on you and it's just you. That's him. And here he is. He's Antiochus Epiphanes. You don't mess with me. And now he's got to what? He's got to humbly say, okay, we're going to leave. We're out of here. And Rome allowed him to do that. You have to understand this. God is in control of every bit of this. Because what does God do? He sends a dictator with his tail between his legs back to where? Israel. To do what? To take out his vengeance against them. I was just humiliated. Now I'm coming back and I'm taking vengeance on you again. And he does this several times. To me, that's like, okay, God, you've made it very clear you are in control of all the chess plays. You're moving this here, got this coming down here, this here. You're in control of everything. Because why? Because he is. That's why he's the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And so what happens, Pastor? Well, this is what happens. He goes back. And the rage of Antiochus, and it becomes to save his face, he wants to make a scapegoat. Who's going to be the scapegoat? Well, obviously, it's going to be Israel. So secondly, Antiochus and his revenge. His revenge. We'll go through this quickly. First of all, we're told how he invaded Jerusalem. He invaded Jerusalem. Verse 30 says that. The apostate Jews, led by Menelaus, were doing all their power to rid the Jews of circumcision and other distinctives of Judaism, and were trying to persuade their countrymen to adopt Hellenism. Okay? Antiochus decided to give them a helping hand. He sent the Syrian general and a force of some 20,000 men to attack Jerusalem. Their massacre of worshipers in the temple was only the beginning of sorrows. So he invaded Jerusalem. Secondly, Antiochus insulted Jehovah. He insulted Jehovah. The attack on Jerusalem took place on when? On the Sabbath. Why? Because when are the worshipers going to be out? On the Sabbath, worshiping God, and what are they going to do? They're not going to fight. They're not going to fight. And guess what? He knows that. And so he's going to use that to his advantage. And the troops ravaged the city, tearing down buildings and spreading terror. They occupied the citadel overlooking the temple and repaired it, building massive walls and garrisoning it with Syrian troops. Then Antiochus issued a decree calling on everyone on pain of death to join in a universal religion and obey universal laws. Does that sound familiar of what's going to happen in the book of Revelation? It's the same thing. Everyone had to conform to the Greek religion. The Jewish temple was consecrated by Jupiter Olympus, and Antiochus, identifying himself with his pagan god, demanded that he himself be worshipped also. And he ordered an immediate termination of all Jewish sacrifices, observances of the Sabbath, and ceremonial observances. He destroyed copies of the Scriptures. He literally burned them in front of them, and he replaced the annual Feast of Tabernacles with a feast to Bacchus. Who in the world's Bacchus? It's the god of wine, the god of revelry. And he preserved the youth of the city with vile practices. Always go after the youth. They're the next generation. And so, worst of all, he desecrated the temple. He built an idol altar over the brazen altar. So he did this, and he knew exactly what he was doing. Finally, we're told that Antiochus inflamed Judea. He inflamed Judea. He had gone too far, and massive resistance to his oppression broke out, but not by everyone. In fact, we're told, first of all, of those who deified him. You see this in verse 32. And such as do wickedly against the covenant, against Israel, shall he corrupt by flatteries. Doing the same thing he always does. Antiochus Epiphanes was not without admirers and followers among the apostate Jews in Judea. Other Jews were halting between two opinions. You see, they were attracted by the philosophy and the brilliance of Greek rationalism, yet they were still tied to the truths and the traditions of conservative faith. And so now they were forced to decide one way or the other. Many of them took the easy way out and allowed themselves to be Hellenized. But God always what? He always has a remnant. And so there wasn't those that deified him, there were those who defied him. Those that defied him. Some people in that unhappy land knew their God. Theirs was an experiential knowledge, not just an intellectual one. See, that's the difference. You can know about Christ, but if he's not your Savior, it makes no difference. You got to know him by experience, and you got to allow him to change your life. So they did this, and they took a brave stand against the wickedness that was now inundating the country, and that would continue unabated for 3 years. They braved the storm, defied the wicked king and his decrees, and dared to endure all of the consequences to be true to Jehovah. And so men who knew the Word of God and who struggled to keep the true faith alive in the midst of persecution, they would emerge. And they could see how these things had been foretold. They were living in the days, and they could take Daniel's prophecy and they could say, hey, right here, this is where we're living at. This is exactly what's going on. And they believed God's word, and they followed God's word. These men did no great martial exploits, as did the Maccabees. They performed no heroic deeds on the battlefield. They read the Scriptures, believed them, understood them, looked beyond the tribulation of their day, and with sure and certain hope, they looked for the coming of Jesus Christ. That's who they were. And that's why I had Seth read Hebrews chapter 11. Because this scripture right here, many believe, includes that 400-year period. Women received their dead raised to life again, and others were tortured, not accepting deliverance that they might obtain a better resurrection. 40,000 were martyred, and another 40,000 kids and women were taken off as slaves. 80,000 people at that time. And others had a trial of cruel mockings and scourging, yea, moreover, of bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn asunder, tempted, were slain with a sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. Amen. The world is not even worthy to what? To know their name? You're not even worthy to know their name. God knows who each one of them are. Every single one of them he knows. Just like he knows every single one of us. And so go back to Hebrews chapter 11. Go back to Daniel chapter 11. Now when they shall fall, they shall be helped with a little help. But many shall cleave to them with flatteries. What's that mean? Oh, you remember the ones that were sitting on the fence? And the ones that were tiny were with Epiphanes? They say, yeah, he's a good guy. They said, no, we're not with him anymore. We're with you now. Because why? Because they were scared to death of the Maccabees. Let me say this to you. You better have a biblical reason for why you live the way you live. It doesn't make a difference who the leader is, who the pastor is, who the Sunday school teacher is, who mom and dad is. You better personally have a biblical reason for living the way you live. And that reason ought to match what God commands us to do. It's a personal thing. There will be none of you with me when I give an account for my life. None of you. Not even the most dearest person in my life other than Christ is my wife, Amy. She won't be with me either. It'll be me alone. Guess what? For you, it'll be you alone. Standing before God, give an account for what you have done with what He has given you. And wouldn't you agree, He's given you a whole lot? A whole lot. So you need to understand that. It's a real thing. Daniel knew that, and he was faithful to the end. The one small ray of hope and comfort for those who suffered through this ordeal was found in a guy by the name of Mattathias. We're done. Mattathias was a priest living in Modin, and his 5 sons who became known as the Maccabees. Okay? And when Antiochus' officers arrived at Modin to enforce the king's decree, Mattathias and his sons defied them, and a skirmish ensued, and the fiery rebels slew their enemies, and so the resistance began. Upon the death of Mattathias, the struggle was continued by his son Judas Maccabeus. Okay, and so this able guerrilla leader cut to ribbons the armies that Antiochus Epiphanes sent against him. By the end of 6 years, Judas had become a power in the land and had become put together an army in which could be reckoned with. And many Jews who had deserted the Judean cause now came back with hypocritical declarations of loyalty, motivated by fear of retaliations by the victorious Maccabeans. And at length, the Maccabeans marched on Jerusalem and recovered the city and its fortress. They repaired, they cleansed, and they rededicated the temple amid the rejoicing of the people. A new feast came about, the feast of dedication called Hanukkah. And now you know the rest of the story. All right? And so, at this point in the narrative, the prophecy leaps over literally centuries. When you leave verse 35 and you jump to verse 36, there's a whole lot of time between there. You say, does this ever happen in Scripture before? You remember we just went through Daniel chapter 9. In Daniel chapter 9, verse 25 and 26, in that area, you leap a long ways. And so yes, the 69th week to the 70th week of Daniel and the prophecy given, that still has not occurred, that 70th week. But I want you to know, I believe that it's closer than it ever has been before. And I believe it's going to happen soon. So what's he say? Daniel would tell you and me, he'd say, get ready. He said, live for the Lord right now with all of your heart, mind, body, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. And do exactly what God commands, because when He comes back, the King will come. And it will be absolutely wonderful. Isn't it interesting when things like that go on? You thought that was my stomach. It's not. I'm done. And this may be the longest time I've ever preached in my life. But I am done. I want you to know that. So that's done as well. Let's pray.